Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to this special broadcast on Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha. 6 years ago at the UN Climate Action Summit in New York, Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced the launch of a landmark initiative, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, or the CDRI. Emphasizing the need for a global movement guided by need, not greed, he laid out a practical roadmap for the world to enhance the resilience of infrastructure systems to climate and disaster risks, and in doing so, ensure sustainable development. Today, as we mark the 6th anniversary of that announcement on the 23rd of September 2025, the coalition has grown from an idea to a truly global platform with 59 members and 9 partner organizations. Over these years, CDRI has enabled countries to access international expertise, technical support, funding opportunities, research collaborations, and innovative solutions, all to strengthen the resilience of infrastructure worldwide. So to discuss CDRI's 6-year journey, its flagship projects, the impact it has achieved, and its long-term vision for resilient infrastructure, I'm joined today for a conversation by Mr. Amit Prothi, Director General of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Thank you, sir, for your time. Absolute pleasure to have you with us on this edition of Samvaad on Sansad TV. And also, first of all, congratulations on the 6th anniversary of CDRI. To begin our conversation, let's talk about how this 6-year journey has been. It was back in 2019 when the Prime Minister announced the launch of CDRI, first as a global initiative to encourage, to promote resilient infrastructures worldwide. But the journey has been remarkable, as we just told our viewers. So from your perspective, talk to us about CDRI's growth over the last 6 years in terms of its vision, its mandate, and most importantly, the global acceptance that it has had.
First of all, Tina, thank you so much for inviting me. I think, as you said, it's a really pivotal moment for us. The Honorable Prime Minister launched this initiative in New York in the climate summit, basically saying that India will bring leadership to a topic that's very, very critical to not only India, but to the world. When we talk about Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, I want to emphasize all 4 words. Coalition, it's India-led, but it's a coalition. Disaster resilient infrastructure. If you think about the amount of infrastructure we're building today in India and around the world, something like 20 new Bombays of infrastructure has to be built in India alone. Add Africa, add other parts of the world. We are building a lot of infrastructure. Yet, as we look around on a daily basis, we're seeing activities like cyclones, we're seeing events like earthquakes, we're seeing tsunamis, etc., that are damaging infrastructure. So as a topic, it was really critical to see how India brings leadership to a topic that's important to us and for others. It's easier said than done, right? I think the pace of development that we're seeing in India is unprecedented. No other country, except maybe China, has gone through this scale of development. Right. Now, building a movement, I'm really proud to say that when we launched, there were 16 members to CDRI. Today there are, you said 59, as of today there are 60. So we are really adding members very quickly. That speaks volume to the mandate, but also to the importance of the agenda. So the last 6 years, it's really been about, taking an idea, giving it shape, giving it sort of a structure to say, what do we do? DRI, disaster resilient infrastructure, needs a lot of definitions. We've spent a lot of time trying to unpackage that. Unpackage, how do you build your roads so they don't get damaged by landslides? Is the work done? No. The work has just started. I can I can go on, but maybe I'll give you a moment to just maybe ask me the next question.
In fact, I do have a lot of questions, and especially on the urban resilience, because that's something that we are dealing with, and the challenges every now and then across different cities, not just in India, but worldwide. Yeah. But for now, let's come back to CDRI's remarkable growth. 6 years, nearly 60 members, not nearly, now you have 60 members and 9 partner organizations. What does this global confidence say about the kind of work you've done in terms of how you started with, but where you are today?
Yeah, so I think when we started, it was still a very new topic. We all have agreements that we sign up as countries. There's something called the Sendai framework that most countries have agreed to pursue to reduce disaster risk in our countries. One of the key targets is on resilient infrastructure. The target was set, countries had agreed to the target, but in 2019, we are still seeing a lot of countries had not yet worked towards that target. So we've spent a lot of time in the last 6 years starting to build an argument for how do you focus on resilient infrastructure, how do you meet that target. I'll give you an example. We came up with the report a year and a half ago that highlighted that every year we lose infrastructure, we lose value because of disasters. So when you have an earthquake and your houses collapse, or when you have a cyclone and the power grid gets impacted, when you add up the amount of damage that we suffer as a world, it adds up to something like $700 billion worth of infrastructure damage. That was an argument to help countries, start to pay more attention to this. Now, what we've done is that, we've come out with initiatives for island nations, for example. We're working with the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean. We're working with Fiji. We're working with Dominica. These are islands in the nation that are repeatedly getting hit by cyclones, other kinds of earthquakes, etc. And they're losing infrastructure. So what CDRI as a coalition is trying to do is saying, how do we provide support to these islands? How do we give them technical assistance? How do we help them upgrade their building codes? Yeah. How do we help train their next generation so that they can be better prepared? These events are not going away. But you're building infrastructure. How do you do it in a way that you don't lose it again and again, but you actually do it in a way that you know it's coming, but your house will stay standing?
How does CDRI's role complement the work of other agencies in this area, such as COP, the Sendai framework you mentioned, or the SDGs? We have a list of 17 goals. So how are you complementing your work with these?
So because we're focused on disaster resilient infrastructure, SDGs, all of the goals, I think there's an infrastructure element to those goals. If you want to meet the ambition of the goal number 6, which is on water, or you want to meet the ambition of goal number 11, which is on cities, infrastructure plays a critical aspect of how do you meet those goals. Now, when you lose infrastructure, you're not basically meeting that goal, or you're compromising the, if you say, I want to build sustainable cities. Sustainable cities means providing housing, water, other forms of infrastructure. When you're building it and you lose it, you're not meeting your goal. So infrastructure is the backbone of development. Infrastructure is the backbone of meeting the SDGs. Yet you're not able to meet those goals, partly because you're also losing infrastructure.
So with the climate change events intensifying the disasters, not just in India, but across many countries worldwide, what are the emerging infrastructure vulnerabilities that CDRI is focusing on? And especially in this context, if you could highlight what role you're playing in the low and middle income countries.
Sure. So I think when you talk about climate change, maybe I'll highlight two things that are getting worse. One, the whole notion of extreme heat. Because of global warming, we are actually now trapping a lot more gases in the atmosphere that is actually heating up the planet. Right. We feel that, we see that. Now what happens is that actually accumulates more pressure. The clouds are heavier. We see heavier rainfall. We see rainfall which is like a certain volume that falls that we've not expected in the past. Now, for our cities, for example, and we're looking at now cities across 5 countries where we're trying to see how cities can be better planned for larger volume of water that's falling. So how do you manage your floods better? We're looking at how extreme heat is interfering with infrastructure. I'll give you an example. When you have our roads are being built for a certain temperature, and now extreme heat is causing our roads the tar to melt. Or railroads sometimes are being built, but the tracks are starting to buckle up. Or you're running trains, and now you need to actually be better prepared for a warmer climate. And so for extreme heat, what we've done is we've come up with some advisories. Because we are a coalition, we brought together experts to say, what can we do in the context of, let's say, metro. We're all using metro. Metro relies on a certain kind of ridership. Now, if it is a very hot day, you may not want to walk to the metro. So what do you do in that context? If you're a metro provider, can you start to think about not only do you need to provide your service, but you need to ensure ridership. Right. You need to ensure that that person who's going to be riding your metro can get into the metro, get off the metro from the starting point to the end point. So we came up with an advisory for the metro. Similarly, we are putting something together for safe schools. You know, when you talk about, again, a very hot day, our children are studying in very hot conditions. Can we do something to reduce the temperature inside? Can we do something for the school to be a cooler space? So what we're trying to do is bring experts from around our coalition members to say, focus on schools by doing A, B, C, and D. Focus on your metro system to make sure your ridership is there by doing A, B, C, and D. So what we're trying to say is that these challenges that are getting exacerbated because of climate change, because we are a coalition, because we have access to expertise in 60 members now, how can we bring together knowledge quickly that can then inform the people who are trying to make decisions around this infrastructure? So we are trying to break down climate change, because otherwise climate change is such a big topic that for an infrastructure provider, you know, how does it affect you? So we're trying to help translate that climate change into the decisions that an infrastructure provider has to be thinking about. You know, either you're building it, or you need to maintain your infrastructure, or you need to think about ridership. So we're really trying to unpackage this problem of climate change, particularly extreme heat and water and floods related, for infrastructure provider. So on one end, it's creating sort of these advisories and knowledge. On the other end, we're also trying to see how we can support countries. You know, I've just had a delegation from the African Union here for the last 2.5 days. And we've been talking to them to say, how do we as a coalition support the urbanizing continent? You know, Africa is urbanizing very quickly. The research shows that on that continent, the impact on infrastructure from climate change, the problems of today will be exacerbated by about 25–30%. Yes. So we're sitting with them and saying, how can we support you through technical assistance, grant funding, where your decision makers at the city level can start to be better prepared for this, you know, either more flooding or water scarcity or extreme heat that's related to climate change. So we're trying to create these channels.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So tell us more about what these solutions are. Are these technology-based solutions, or are you taking us more towards nature-based solutions? What are these solutions, especially in context of the Indian cities, if I would like to?
So I would say that, you know, at the most basic level, it is about the ability to innovate. When you talk about various kinds of solutions, I want to emphasize that there are some solutions that exist today, but there are some solutions that still need to be developed. Right. So for CDRI, we are trying to look at it from a point of view of today's solutions are about how do we bring knowledge from other countries or other cities. You know, even within India, some cities, like Ahmedabad, has been dealing with extreme heat for a much longer period than other cities. So it's about transfer of that knowledge. For other cities, it's about, you know, what is the context in your condition and how can other countries who are doing something, how do we bring it to you? Now, examples, you know, we worked with the National Disaster Management Authority in India, and we came up with a guideline on cooling centers. So I think about 3 weeks ago, a number of us in CDRI, NDMA, and several knowledge partners came out and put out a guideline on developing cooling centers across the country. This is an advisory of saying to city governments, when you have temperature exceeding a certain threshold, here are certain ways of approaching building a cooling center. It gets into location, it gets into materials, it gets into creating thermal comfort inside, it gets into safety, it gets into a lot of aspects of saying, we need shelters from the heat, particularly for our workers who are working outside. Here is one way to do it. So that's a specific solution. Nature-based solutions, you know, we've also realized that if you pay attention to what is going on in our natural environment, sometimes the solution may already be there. An example is mangroves. So if you think about mangroves along coastal areas, there's a lot of coastal erosion that we are facing. India is facing, Bangladesh is facing, a lot of countries around the world are facing. Traditionally, if you ask an engineer, they would have said, let's build a seawall. There are examples of seawalls around the world. I'll give you an example in Vietnam. I was working off the coast, in a coastal province in Vietnam, and there's a beautiful abandoned, in a place called Han Li, there's a beautiful abandoned church. So it's this was a province in Vietnam where there's a lot of Catholicism. The church was part of the community about 100 years ago. It's on the coast, but today the church is standing literally on the beach and it's abandoned. And if you look into the water, you see a seawall that is abandoned. And now the city, the country has built a seawall about 300 meters behind the church. What that tells me is that you can build seawalls, but the ocean is actually maybe going to take it over. Now we're realizing that mangroves, which are a natural system, can actually do a better job of protecting your coast. They're living environments. They provide livelihoods. They don't decay with time, which infrastructure does, with hard infrastructure does. So there's a big push today to see how within nature you find such solutions, which are, the US came up with a nomenclature called engineering with nature. Just a recognition that nature-based solutions or natural environment provides you solutions that can actually help address some of these increasing risks that we are facing. And for CDRI, what we are trying to do is that when you're building infrastructure to address greater risks that are coming, can you do it in a way which is not just hard infrastructure, but which can also borrow from the natural environment and put, so we're promoting those kinds of solutions as well. All of this is newer work.
About Vietnam, actually, it took me to what we've been witnessing over the last few months in our hill states of Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, where the rivers have taken over a lot of the infrastructure. And in a way, we are seeing that these extreme weather events, through these extreme weather events that are taking place, how cities have become the front lines of these disasters, and they're not just causing widespread damage to property, to lives and property, but of course, in terms of infrastructure resilience, there's a huge question mark. What are the gaps in the Indian context that you think that we need to immediately address, because such incidents are only increasing every day?
Yeah, so I'll say three things. I think one, a better understanding of where the risk is. So when you see images of destruction, which is really, really unfortunate in our hill towns, yes, you often realize that there is a river stream. I mean, there was a very recent example of the river actually overflew its boundaries, and whatever was built around it got damaged. Now, river streams take a certain course, and they do change, but there is now science available to help understand how does a river flow and how much could it change. It's not 100% predictable, but it is relatively more predictable than it was in the past. So we need to really do a better job of understanding where are those risk-prone areas in our hill towns. Where is that stream, that gully, that area that could maybe have more landslides just because of the geology there. So we can do that, we can understand that, and we can map it. So that's really needed. The second part of that is, what do you do when it comes to building your buildings and roads, etc.? How do you actually take that information into your decisions of where to build, right? Now, we are facing rapid development, rapid urban development. It's not easy to be completely planned with everything, but we really need to make a bigger, much more effort towards saying, if I know where the risk is, how do I avoid that area? How do I really make sure that, as a government, I don't allow development, or as an individual who owns a property in that location, I need to be, am I really willing to put my investment in building a building in a place which, it's high likelihood of collapsing? So that's the second part. The third part is capacity. Our professionals, we need many more, the number of people we need who can actually get into these complex problems and help solve them. It's the need of the hour. I think we don't have enough trained professionals who understand the complexity of the problem to build better.
In fact, since you're an expert on urban resilience matters, let me ask you this question. In urban planning, community participation is one aspect which is often overlooked. How can we encourage and promote more meaningful conversations and with the citizens especially, at the time when these strategies are being devised, because that's most important, because that's where perhaps all the effort should be made in. Are we lacking on that front? Or if yes, I am sure efforts are also being made towards that. So tell us more about what these efforts are.
Sure. So I think community participation is absolutely critical when you come to making these decisions. And, I've had an opportunity now to work across more than 15, 20 countries in the world, right? So, and I can give you examples of, I remember being in Korea, in the capital city, and we were working on resilience. And we organized a meeting where 6 or 7 departments within the city municipality came together. And when we walked away, the people were so proud that so many departments had come together, because that had never happened in the past. I remember working in China, and 2 departments came together and talked to each other, and they'd never done it. I remember working in Mongolia in the Gobi Desert in settlement planning there, and we had a town hall with people living in the city, in the settlement, and they were very excited to be engaging. In India as well, I think it's something we are learning. Traditionally we've always, look at panchayat. What is panchayat? It's a community engagement in decision making. Community engagement is about also having the confidence to say, I want to hear my community. I want to understand from their perspective, but it's also, there's a relationship that has to be built. Because we also have community members who will stick to a certain point and may not understand what the government is trying to do either. So it's a two-way street, and that relationship building is absolutely important. In the disaster management field, what we say is that it's actually when there is no disaster, when things are normal, or when things are actually going on a day-to-day basis, that's when you need to build the relationship. Because when there is a disaster and you need that community engagement, you need to have the trust in your community, right? So a lot of effort actually goes into community engagement, but a lot more needs to be done.
Okay, so in context of what you're doing and the kind of efforts that are underway, tell us about flagship studies, reports, or pilot projects where CDRI's findings have contributed majorly to building more resilient infrastructure, and particularly in the vulnerable communities. You spoke about traveling so much across 15 to 20 countries, so you know each of those challenges, and how are we addressing them is something that we would like to know from you.
Sure, so I'll give you maybe 3 examples. We have a flagship program called Infrastructure for Resilient Island States. We've got 4 governments that are supporting it. We're giving grants to island nations around, at this point, about 25 nations in the world are receiving grant funding from CDRI. It's an example in Dominica, in the Caribbean. The island was hit by a major storm, and they've got about 25,000 houses that got damaged. So CDRI commissioned a study to see how those houses could be improved. How do you actually, not only bring the house to livable standards for today, but then also be prepared for tomorrow's storms. So that study has just been finished, and now the country is trying to pull together resources to upgrade the housing. Similarly, in Fiji, we are helping the country look at early warning systems. So we're helping them come up with methodologies of developing early warning, so that the community can be safer when there is a cyclone that comes about. In Comoros, we've just started a study to look at safe schools. So, again, it's an island that gets hit by cyclonic activity and other risks, and we're looking at schools and saying, they have 1,000+ schools. How do you make them more resilient to the storms that are coming? In Papua New Guinea, we are working with the Department of Transportation to see how their roads can be more secure from landslide risk. So these are just a few examples of how we're trying to work in other countries to see how their infrastructure can be better prepared for tomorrow. In India, we did a study for the state of Odisha. We looked at the power grid along about 60 kilometers of the coast to understand, because of cyclonic activity, that is actually getting more frequent, more, the wind speeds are actually picking up beyond what they were. Because of climate change, something called gust speed that damages infrastructure is increasing. So we did a study, and we recommended to the state of how do you look at that infrastructure and where do you prioritize investments to upgrade your infrastructure. So we looked at things like the age of infrastructure, things like where could you get flooded, which towers could collapse, what were those towers feeding, if they're feeding a hospital, if they're feeding. So we came up with a whole methodology for the government to say, within the 60 kilometers, if you need to prioritize investments to upgrade, here are certain areas that are more vulnerable because of what is being served in those areas, right? So these are methodologies that are necessary, that are relatively new, but also replicable to other countries. So this is just an example.
This was about the existing infrastructures and how to save them. Yeah. But in one of your reports I came across, it mentions that 60% of the infrastructure required by 2050 is yet to be built. Yeah. Tell us about how does this statistic shape CDRI's priorities and partnerships going forward? Sure.
So, when you think about all of the new infrastructure that needs to be built, roads, power lines, telecommunication, schools, hospitals, etc. We have codes and standards today which this infrastructure is being designed towards. Everything that we're designing, there are certain codes and standards that dictate what is to be done. So we're looking at those codes and standards more carefully. Again, if I take the island nations, for example, they're trying to see how their codes and standards could be improved so what they build tomorrow is actually better prepared for tomorrow's problems. Right. Same thing in Africa. Africa's, there's lots of development still happening in Africa. Energy systems are being built, again roads are being built, housing is being built. So we're trying to come out with methodologies, and this is all through grant funding to countries to say, we'll help you develop a better code so that when you are building your road, you've got an understanding that if you're in a flood-prone area, this is the kind of codes you need to meet. If you've got, so this the whole notion of policy that defines development, that's work we're doing. That again shapes tomorrow's development. When it comes to cities, a lot of the development is happening on the periphery. Now, how do you design it in a way where you're recognizing your risks already? For example, you have wetlands, you have slopes, you have areas that are more prone to disasters. How do you recognize that? So that when you're building, you're not building in those areas. That's about new development, right? So same thing goes with infrastructure, same thing goes with airports. We're building a lot of airports. Are we building them in locations where the airport may get flooded or a landslide may get, In the earthquake space, we know that we've had standards already for earthquakes. We know if we're in a zone 4, zone 5, our buildings are trying to be responsive to that. But data centers, it's a very new space. Airports is relatively new. So we're trying to bring to these infrastructures that will be built this approach of understanding risk, recognizing risk, and then introducing codes, standards, and guidelines of saying how do you address those risks while you're still thinking about planning them.
And that's an interesting conversation. I would love for us to keep talking about some of these challenges, particularly that we are seeing in our everyday lives. But it's remarkable that in just 6 years, CDRI has grown from 16 members to 60 members, as Mr. Prothi spoke on earlier in the program. But at the same time, what started just as a global initiative has today become a global platform for knowledge sharing, for sharing of international best practices, and providing timely solutions to challenges that can even be customized for countries depending on their level and scale of challenges that they face. That's something that we learned from the DG CDRI on what their core area of work is and how they are prioritizing solutions for specific countries, especially in the vulnerable parts of the world. With that, we'll have to wrap up this conversation. Time allows me to take up only that much on this edition of Samvaad. Thank you once again, Mr. Prothi, for joining us for this very engaging and insightful conversation. To you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well.